It was an era of good and evil, when people and monsters opposed each other and fiercely tore each other's throats. Every year, tens of thousands of students entered martial arts universities and did everything to save their native lands. Some stood out from the rest. All the attention was focused on them, girls were hovering around them, classmates were constantly trying to win back the championship and losing time after time. Each of them regularly measured their strength in the hope of moving from the chi refining stage to the foundation stage as quickly as possible. However, some did not succeed, and were then ridiculed by their former comrades. At times, the students and the entire world along with them were threatened not only by monsters, but also by other people who were ready to sacrifice the lives of future or current defenders for their own benefit. Sometimes I even had to face them in battle, risking my lives and honor. Some, in the event of such fights, discovered incredible possibilities within themselves. But sometimes the sky above the cities was still peaceful, even though this peace was as fragile as crystal. Kaiyuan High School had special rooms set up for those who wanted to devote their free time to cultivation. One of them was currently glowing blue. This was practiced by one of the students of the Kaiyuan school, Stefan. Today he had already done enough to allow himself a rest. But before that, you need to check something. What if the data has changed? The device Stefan was using lit up, and letters scrolled across the screen, confirming that the corresponding student had been found in the database. Waves of blue light enveloped the young man, and the wind blew his hair up. There was an explosion. Stefan's clothes were torn to pieces. He covered his face with his hand in irritation. Another device reached the 9,999th level of chi purification and broke, unable to cross the boundaries of the measurable. Leona, the head of their group, showed up at the wrong time. In fact, his cultivation time was over, but if it hadn't been for the route, she wouldn't have come running to kick him out. It turns out that other students were constantly complaining about him, and she had to defend his interests to the management every now and then. And what happened here anyway? Leona decided that since she was here, it was time to find out how Stefan was doing with his personal cultivation. She didn't believe that the explosion was caused by a broken device. Everyone knew that there were only 10 levels of chi purification, and then came the foundation. After all, each of them needs this solitude to enter university. And in other classes, almost everyone has already moved on to the stage of laying the foundations. They must make every effort to achieve a high level, because while the students are under the protection of the school, outside of it people are regularly attacked by monsters. Experts claimed that a period of famines was coming, one of the most severe and difficult for people. This time, it should last at least 50 years. The number of monsters will increase. The university will receive more resources, and the training period will be reduced to 3 years. Getting into the ranks of students as quickly as possible is the duty of every student of the Kaiyuan school. He really only had a month left. The class leader had already left, but knowing he would be upset by the reminder, she sent him a link to a martial arts forum. Stefan immediately posted a message describing his situation and asking for help. While the forum visitors remained silent, the young man thought that until now, everyone who had reached the 10th level of chi purification had formed the necessary foundation and moved on to the next stage. Everyone except him. And the forum was silent. In fact, he felt the aura in his body growing stronger, but it was not concentrated in one place but flowing throughout his entire body. An announcement was made that there would be a meeting at the martial arts stadium in half an hour, and students from all over the school rushed there. Among the others, Ben ran, a self-confident fat man who did not fail to push aside and overtake everyone he could. Stefan didn't get out of his way, and even demonstratively showed disrespect by mangling his classmate's name. It seemed like Ben was looking for a fight. Wasn't he up to it last time? Or the time before that? But the opponent had an ace up his sleeve. His comrade had peeked at the class leader's report and saw that Stefan was at the stage of chi purification. Previously, number 1. Now he was lagging behind the entire class. Ben's mind flashed every time he found himself behind. Here was the teacher telling him he could catch up to his friend if he tried harder. Here the girl refuses him. She would prefer Stefan. The others look and laugh. It's time to get even. In a rage, Ben summoned all his energy. A cloud of red energy enveloped the young man, looming over Stefan like a serious threat. The young man raised his hands, protecting himself from the blow. Is this what the third level of laying the foundations looks like? However, suddenly Ben flew into the wall as if he had met a counterblow 3 times more powerful. Neither he nor the audience expected such a turn of events. The victim's comrades immediately gathered to complain, but Stefan asked those around him with a grin if they had seen anything, and all the students shook their heads in unison. The stadium gradually filled with people. While there was time, the young man went to his teacher, Mr. Hilton. The man had been leading their group for many years and was ready to help with any problem. And now he immediately took up the student's issue. His aura seemed to be very dense, but he was still in the chi refining stage. Right now, the teacher couldn't comment on this, so he simply patted the youth on the shoulder and reminded him that even if he didn't enter the university, his life would not end, and he could choose another path. However, when the teacher asked what level of chi refining Stefan was at, he was struck by lightning. What kind of 10,000th level were they talking about? Then a cry was heard. A man was wounded. Stefan and Mr. Hilton immediately ran to the call. The girl in red was the one who was injured. The teacher determined that the wound was serious and that it had been inflicted by someone who was in the final stages of laying the foundations. Meanwhile, the guards weren't worried about anything. The school was protected from all sides. The strongest were gathered there. It was unlikely that anything would happen. But the people behind the glass of the office still caught their attention. Who are they? Students? Then where are their cards and what are they doing here? However, before the guards could ask all these questions, the glass shattered into pieces and one of them was killed. The second one didn't even have time to reach the radio. His life was cut short just as quickly. The four killers entered the school grounds. Meanwhile, Director Johnson appeared at the stadium. He was a white-haired man flying on a golden sword, which meant that he was already at the golden pill stage, one of the highest stages of cultivation. The wounded woman, seeing him, managed to squeeze out, "Your Gand," and then lost consciousness. The principal immediately went up on stage and announced that the ceremony for the upcoming university entrance was postponed. The students gasped in unison. This had not happened for many decades. What had happened? Terrible words flew over the crowd. Teachers must direct students to safe places so that none of them would accidentally be attacked by the Order of Jormungand. The crowd moved for cover. Stefan was about to head there too, but then someone grabbed his arm. It was Leona. She pulled him out of the crowd and pulled him somewhere with her, full of enthusiasm. When they were away from the rest of the students, the girl showed him a poster. It said that there was a huge reward for the capture of the members of the Order. And as Stefan just stared at the paper, she leaned over and whispered that this was his chance. Her parents were government employees, so she knew about it before anyone else. If he did it, he would definitely go to university, and they could split the money. This whisper turned out to be unexpectedly exciting. The girl blushed. Stefan also felt embarrassed by such close contact. However, he quickly threw the paper aside and headed for the dorm, certain that he would die if he encountered the members of Jormungand. Poor Leona had been rejected in her best intentions. At the same time, one of Ben's friends rushed to Mr. Hilton to complain about the skirmish. He told with a pitiful look that his friend was vomiting blood and that he seemed to have broken ribs. The teacher immediately jumped on his sword and, grabbing the student by the hand, rushed to the scene of the incident. Meanwhile, the members of the Jormungand Order were comfortably accommodated in the boys' dormitory of the Kayuan school. They considered this place a good hiding place. It is convenient to observe what is happening from here. It is unlikely that anyone will stick their nose in here. You can prepare to kill the observer of the entrance exams. It's time to start. Everyone knows their area of responsibility. Everyone is responsible for the successful completion of the mission. At the same time, however, there was a man in the dormitory who had missed the move to the shelter. Stefan. Unsuspecting of anything, he was happy about a new comment to his post about cleansing chi. Some expert wrote that everyone knows about the maximum number of cultivation levels. After the 10th, the foundations are invariably laid. If he really has a 10,000th cultivation level, then his energy must be inexhaustible. However, Stefan should have checked the functionality of the device he used to take the measurements. The commentator thought that the current applicants were some kind of crazy. Well, okay, no one believes, and no need. The young man also decided to go to a safe place and was genuinely surprised that the hostel was empty. Meanwhile, Webster was no less surprised. He was sure that all the students had left the dormitory. But he had taken precautions and put on a school uniform, so he probably did not have to worry about being exposed. However, this guy must have seen Jormungand's tattoo. It turns out that the only correct solution is to kill the witness. Stefan himself didn't notice anything at first, but now, of course, he remembered. People from the Order wear tattoos like that. The young man managed to dodge, although even he himself did not expect such agility. The clot of energy flew into the wall, breaking through it and lighting everything up red. This man must have been at the peak of laying the foundations. If he hit, there was little chance of survival. Stefan forced himself to gather all the energy available to him into one point in order to strike or at least defend himself. Webster barely managed to stay on his feet. This kid was at the chi refining stage. Even those with a golden pill weren't always capable of such attacks. Well, then it'll take a little effort to deal with him. This time he would definitely kill this youngster. And Stefan could only defend himself in the hope of surviving. However, Webster realized that his energy was no longer flowing out freely. It was being pulled out by force, as if absorbed. A moment's hesitation gave Stefan the opportunity to make a dash and deliver a heavy blow. When the heat of battle died down a bit, the young man was able to appreciate what he had done. The enemy flew into the wall and even dented it. Streams of blood flowed from his mouth. His bruised chest did not move, hinting at the absence of breathing. How could he beat someone at the foundation stage? Maybe he really does have endless reserves of energy, and that person in the comments was right. But that's stupid. He's just a simple disciple. Besides, during the battle, that man from the Order seemed to have his blood boiling, so why not think he had a heart attack? Yes, that's exactly it. But it's still better not to leave the body here. It will raise questions from the allies if any appear. And it will be difficult for the director to explain what happened. In general, first he needs to hide the body, then he can discuss everything with the teacher. Mr. Hilton himself did not suspect anything about Stefan's power. He asked Ben about what happened, but he found it hard to believe his ears. How could a person at the chi refining stage be able to defeat someone at the third foundation stage? Ben's friends pounced at the same time, insisting that Stefan must have used some underhanded methods or lied about the stage he was at. However, the teacher quickly dispersed the chatterboxes and turned his attention to the other teachers, who reported that there were still people who had suffered from Jormungand. So the director raised the mission to rank A.
It was serious, but the students' fight could not be ignored as footage.
What he saw could only be described as a sudden burst of energy that allows one to defeat an opponent whose rank is an order of magnitude higher. But such cases are critically rare. Stefan seems to have amazing abilities. We need to help him get into university, otherwise the world will lose a strong protector. Thinking about this, the teacher seemed not to notice that mortal danger was falling on him from above. However, it only seemed that way. Devon's attack was blocked, causing sparks to fly from his knife. Under the attacker's hood, a tattoo of a snake eating its own tail was visible. The persistent enemy immediately launched a second attack. The blows rained down one after another, but the heavy-set, seemingly bulky Mr. Hilton blocked them with ease. It was like a game of cat and mouse, and when the cat teacher got tired of dodging, he simply caught the attacker's fist, causing him to slow down. This moment was enough. The blow threw Devon into the wall. His mouth flew open from the blow and a fountain of blood flew out. There was no point in fighting any further. The enemy was too tough for Devon. Taking advantage of the opportunity, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a couple of marbles he had saved for such an occasion. They exploded, enveloping everything around in a smokescreen. Realizing that the enemy had left, Mr. Hilton thought, I need to inform the director that the Jormungand had infiltrated the campus. Gabe and Larry were waiting in one of the dorm rooms. The man with glasses looked nervous. Where had Webster gone? Larry was calm. He melancholically assumed that his friend had probably been careless and died. But it's not that easy to kill a level 9 cultivator. Going out to look for Webster, he hissed irritably. How annoying. He only just got to the rank of a golden pill, and now he's getting so impudent. As he peered around the corner, he lost both his irritation and his desire to put Larry in his place. Shock and fear took their place. A student was dragging Webster's lifeless body by the hair. A trail of blood was trailing behind him, making the scene even more terrifying. This guy must be showing off his trophy. He can't be allowed to do that. But what to do? The student is clearly not a weakling. If he dealt with Webster, then he will surely easily deal with him too. Never mind, he still has an ace up his sleeve. His hand dived into his bosom, and a heavy metal handle fit comfortably into it. This was the newest weapon developed by Jormungand. It accumulated spiritual power and then ejected it, increasing the cultivator's power several times. The power of the shot will be more powerful than during the golden pill period. Gabe peered around the corner and pulled the trigger, gathering all the energy around the bullet into a single dark ball. At that moment, all people who were able to read energy fluctuations felt a sharp surge. A look of delight appeared on Gabe's face. Now he was going to deal with the boy. However, the bullet, having collided with the young man's head, ricocheted and hit the wall. Stefan didn't even understand what had happened. His hood was smoking, but he only took it off, looking around in bewilderment. What had touched the back of his head? Taking a good look around, he discovered a flattened bullet on the floor. Near the dormitory, the director discussed with the teachers what could have caused such fluctuations in the energy field. Here, someone's figure flashed in the bushes. Everyone became wary. But it turned out to be only the headman of Leon, looking for Stefan. Only then did the teachers realize that the young man was still in the dormitory, the same place where someone from Jormungand had definitely been. Without waiting for orders, Mr. Hilton turned and headed towards the building, determined to protect his student. He understood that even if Stefan used the same technique he used during the fight with Ben, he still would not be able to stand up to the owner of the golden pill. The school principal couldn't leave it like that. He stepped forward, ready to lead his small team. The others also gathered to go. The squad confidently headed towards the dormitory, intending to save the student no matter the cost. And Stefan finally noticed Gabe. He stood and hit his leg, trying to make it move so that he could disappear as quickly as possible from the sight of a man who had survived such a shot. He already felt the steel hands of the amazing young man closing around his neck. However, Stefan was already about to return the gift back. The bullet flew down the corridor, leaving behind a blue tail. Gabe didn't have time to do anything. A piece of metal hit him in the forehead, blood splashed out of the wound. Life turned out to be too fragile. There were already 2 corpses behind the back of the most ordinary disciple of Kai Yuan. After Gabe, only a gun remained on the floor. Stefan decided that it would be his little trophy. Larry was standing at that ill-fated corner at that moment. What kind of guy is this? So what to do now? Going one-on-one is certain death. Attacking from behind is also risky, but we can't leave it like this. The principal's voice was heard. Larry was forced to flee. He certainly couldn't cope with the troop of teachers. Stefan put the weapon in his belt. What to do? What if they think he helped the members of Jormungand? It took a couple of minutes of thought for a brilliant idea to come to the young man's head. He decided to stage a fight between these two. It was truly amazing. Everything looked so natural. He did it just in time. The director appeared from around the corner with the teachers. Larry was forced to leave the building by jumping out of a window. He will prepare a surprise. Purple energy stretched in threads to the man, giving him the opportunity to correct something in this world. Faces that would soon lose their miserable lives flashed before Larry's eyes. The energy condensed, formed a black spot, and opened the way for the monsters from the other side. Sensing the scent of flesh, the monsters rushed towards the gap. Scaring even Larry, who was in a hurry to retreat, a huge eye appeared in this portal. The director didn't know about it yet, but he was very worried about Stefan, so he hurried to him. Suddenly, a stream of chi power enveloped him, and a legendary golden sword appeared in his hand. Stefan instinctively covered himself with his hands and cowered. Had Mr. Johnson taken him for an ally of Jormungand? However, the director thought that it was the disciple who killed the 2 sect members. With his powers, he realized that the young man was in the Shi refining stage and decided that he could not have done it. Examining the bodies, the man was shocked. Were these 2 really in the final stages of laying the foundations? But who could have killed them both at once? Judging by the examination, their bodies were not transformed but were subjected to constant beatings. Moreover, it appears that they were heavily dependent on stimulant drugs. The cause of death was a soul rupture, and the Schnee were also members of Jormungand. The director was convinced of this only now when he found a characteristic tattoo on the neck of one of the dead. We need to examine everything carefully. Maybe there are some clues? He put his hands in his pockets, taking out various pills, potions, and artifacts, instantly recognizing them and putting them aside. Finally, Mr. Johnson found a black cube with red lines, a tetragonal seal. Only experts know how to open it. It is almost impossible to destroy the durable material. While preparing to hand over the find to Mr. Hilton, the director accidentally dropped it. The cube rolled across the floor and hit the toe of Stefan's boot. There was a small fire in place of the tetragonal seal. It opened, and the young man hadn't even touched it. Inside was a communicator. If it was such an important thing, Stefan thought, then why was it put in such a precarious hiding place? The director immediately figured out the code, and everyone could see the message. It said that the main target was the energy collection tower, and all the other murders were just a cover. So things were much worse than expected. Once the tower collapses, more than half of the buildings powered by its energy will become useless. But most importantly, the resulting explosion will wipe out an entire city. Their real target is the city and all its inhabitants. But the students suggested that the whole thing could have been set up to ensure that the right information ended up in the right hands, causing them to follow the wrong trail. In any case, the tower's defense was a priority. It could not be allowed to be destroyed under any circumstances. The director tried to write a message but realized that he was out of network coverage. We decided to split up to quickly find a network and publish news about what happened so that we could concentrate all our efforts in the right areas. However, they were unable to leave the building. The stairs seemed to be swallowed up by the cosmic void. As they left to look for other places that would allow them to get out, a spiky paw appeared from the void. Returning back the same way, they discovered that the bodies had disappeared. The floor was covered in dust. There was no blood. It seemed as if the bodies had simply dissolved. Besides, they were on the wrong floor. But how could that be? They were definitely coming back the same way. And where is everyone? Stefan and Leona were alone. The young man immediately grabbed the girl's hand so as not to lose at least her. Even though the situation was not conducive to it, the headman was still terribly embarrassed. Stefan pulled the girl along with him, determined to protect her and himself. Leona was as happy with the situation as she could be. Who would have thought that in this touching moment she was literally in danger? The mouth of a huge dragon almost closed on the head of the girl, lost in her thoughts. Stefan, however, was on guard. His sharp gaze met the dragon's. It was high time to run. They rushed into the first classroom they came across with a metal door, hoping to hide from the monster there. Together, they began pushing heavy furniture to barricade the entrance. This could keep the danger out. As soon as the opportunity arose, they unconsciously grabbed each other's hands again. Finally, they could take a little rest. Embarrassed by Stefan's attention, Leona turned away, trying to hide her blush. They felt safe in the classroom, although there were still weak spots in this room. And now, in the hood, the blue spots of the monster's eyes lit up. It was another monster ready to pounce on the students. A huge paw smashed through the hard bars of the grate, bursting inside. Leona instinctively rushed to Stefan. The young man was also scared, but he already had Larry's pistol at the ready. A bolt of energy shot off the barrel of the gun and flew straight at the monster. Stefan's face was distorted with fear. He didn't yet know how this weapon worked, but it worked. The monster fell dead, its heavy body causing the floor to shake. Leona frowned thoughtfully, trying to remember what they had been told about such monsters. It seemed to be an ancient horned dragon, quite dangerous. But the most terrible thing about this dragon was not its terrifying appearance, but the fact that this monster was a pack monster. That meant there were 5 more of them somewhere nearby. Or 10. Or more. They will only have a chance to escape if they deal with most of the monsters. Standing guard at the door, Stefan looked down at Leona. She seemed terribly worried and upset. He tried to console the girl. They would definitely cope. These monsters were not so scary. The surviving members of the Order were forced to leave the dorms and move to the roof of the school itself to discuss how the plan was progressing. Larry took his favorite pipe from his lips and calmly announced, "Gabe and Webster are dead." Devin jumped up. "How is that possible? Who dealt with them?" He was about to rush to tell the leader what had happened, but Larry made him stay put. If the commander found out about this, they would have their heads twisted off. Devin vividly imagined how painful his death would be if they returned empty-handed. But Larry had a plan. He whispered, "Why not lure the student and his teacher into a trap? If they complete the task, no one will remember that the team almost failed." Stefan meanwhile listened, trying to figure out what was going on behind the door and whether there were monsters there. Soon they rushed outside together. Immediately we had to shoot back at another dragon. Teacher Hilton and Principal Johnson also realized that they had lost their students and were left alone. Much time had passed, and they still had no idea what floor they were on. The doors suddenly opened to reveal scaly dragon faces. However, the school management was quite capable of dealing with these monsters. Instantly, they gathered threads of power around themselves, preparing to fight off the dragons and go look for the students. The director didn't even have to try hard to kill one of the dragons. Teacher Hilton did not destroy the monster, but he easily and quickly chained it up. It's been a while since they shook the old stuff like that. No matter how scary the situation, sometimes it's good to stretch. But the students didn't have such abilities. One of them had to frantically wave a bat at the monster. However, she was just a small obstacle for the dragon. One swing of the paw and the bat flew into pieces. The desperate boy cowered, preparing to accept his death. Salvation came to him unexpectedly. Stefan and Leona killed the dragon. But why is the student still here? Wasn't there a warning to go to the shelter? It turned out that he, too, had been delayed in the dorm and was already rushing to a safe place. But then he was caught by an invasion of monsters. Together, they had to move on. Around the corner, they found a huge portal glowing blue. Stefan didn't seem surprised at all, but the others were in shock. On the other side, they were also being watched. Another monster was about to feast on human flesh. Stefan wasn't going to stand aside. He gave his gun to Leona so she could protect herself. The young man boldly approached the portal. It seems that he was the main reason for the appearance of monsters in the dorm. Just as Stefan was thinking about this, something heavy smashed the floor to pieces, throwing him aside. His companions cried out in horror. Could he really not cope with this new enemy now? The attack was unexpected. It seems the portal does not transmit sounds. If he stays nearby, he will not be able to navigate. Standing and waiting for a new attack is simply stupid. It is much more correct to attack immediately. Stefan already believed in his own strength, but his fist seemed to hit an invisible shield. Why did his power disappear as soon as he touched the dragon? But the dragon had no such problems. His roar, a wave of energy, swept the young man away like a feather. At this point, Leona realized that she couldn't just leave it like that. She had to protect Stefan. The girl resolutely raised her pistol, and one after another the bullets flew towards the dragon. However, they simply flew off the dragon's thick skin. The girl was dumbfounded. How so? What to do if even this didn't help? Stefan also realized that his attempt to protect Leona had failed. He screamed that she needed to run quickly. The dragon was already rushing towards her. No, he couldn't allow that. The young man grabbed the dragon by one of its hind legs, determined to overcome it with physical force where spiritual force had failed. The monster's mouth opened right in front of Leona's face, and opposite her it slammed shut, dousing her with stench and splashes of saliva. Stefan used his willpower to wrap himself in a cocoon of chi energy. A little more and he would send this dragon back where it came from. Now he's walking the monster home. What the monsters left on the other side of the portal didn't expect was that one of them would literally fly back in backwards. The red dragon plowed the ground, unable to slow down. Stefan, while there was time, made every effort to collapse this portal. The fabric of the worlds began to tighten. The thin cracks narrowed and healed, giving them a chance at safety. Stefan chuckled as he left, looking into the portal. That's how it was. He wouldn't let anyone threaten his classmates. The dragon roared in despair. The prey was so close. While all this drama was unfolding, Larry was going about his business, planting explosive devices on school grounds. Suddenly, he was interrupted by a rude shout. What class is he from? What is he doing here? Why not in the shelter? Two young teachers approached from behind, extremely displeased with the violation of order. But he really didn't want any trouble. He'll have to deal with it. Larry summoned his powers to use the dark flame technique. Now he will create such vibrations in space that these weaklings will not even escape from the stadium. However, he made the same mistake as his comrades. He underestimated the enemy. The young teachers did not waste time and also began to concentrate chi. What are they doing? Is this a co-cultivation technique? Larry was dumbfounded. This was a very complex technique. Would he be able to withstand such an attack? Although individually these teachers were weaker than a member of Jormungand, together they were more than capable of resisting him. After the first attack, no one retreated. Through the curtain of smoke, two slender silhouettes could be seen rising into the air in a jump to attack. Larry had spent a lot of time on the previous attack, but the teachers were ready for the next stage. The onslaught was hard to contain. Besides, he was alone, and they were clearly a well-coordinated fighting unit. A second later, the foot of one of them had already passed within a centimeter of Larry's face. Finally, a fist from a young teacher was thrust towards his face. Just a little bit more, and the young member of the order would never regret that he never had a partner for dual cultivation. But then a pillar of yellow energy pushed the opponents away from each other. The commander came to save the situation. Larry didn't even seem happy about it. He had had a chance to die quickly and painlessly. Now it was gone. Camp's fist shot up, his eyes glowing fiery red. One of the two teachers ended his life before he could really begin it. The other rushed to him, as if hoping to do something about his comrade's death. But this only brought his death closer. The kick almost tore his body in half. Larry watched this massacre with horror. He had no illusions and understood that he should not expect any leniency. A dirty purple dome gradually began to disperse over the dormitory. It seemed that life could gradually return to normal. The signal was restored and they could once again contact the outside world. But they had been isolated for too long. The teachers had to be gathered at the energy tower urgently to provide her with protection and explain the situation. Each of them arrived at the scene immediately. They were determined to carry out the director's orders and protect the tower at the cost of their lives. Contact with those who were not at the tower was lost. The teachers did not yet know that some of them had died. So, retribution overtook Larry. An iron hand closed on his throat, transparently hinting that the commander was dissatisfied with the work done. He wheezed that it was all the students' fault, but Camp didn't believe him. And quite naturally, since when could a student at the level of key purification do something like that? With a shaking hand, the man picked up the communicator, claiming that only the final part of the operation remained. Well, Camp let him go, giving him one last chance. If he couldn't figure out the energy tower himself, there wouldn't be any more such indulgence. He understands what will happen if he fails here too, right? Even if it costs his life, Larry must plant the bomb. Few could end his life in a less pleasant way than the captain. Camp's hand pressed against the man's back, oppressing him with chi energy that was phenomenally strong even for the owner of the golden pill. Meanwhile, Stefan recounted everything that had happened to him and Leona, and where that young student had come from. He insisted that he was fine, and also that there was a portal at the school, but now it was destroyed. The puzzles in the director's head came together. Of course, the portal explains the appearance of monsters in the building. Jason and Mr. Hilton headed towards the rest of the teachers, and Stefan, determined not to get involved in anything else, headed for cover. He didn't know that Devon was watching him. The order member felt Webster's aura surrounding the student and had no intention of letting him go. The man jumped off the roof to attack the kid from behind and get even with him. Devon called out to the young man, not at all afraid of his strength, which was capable of killing 2 members of the Jormungand order. The man said he smelled like Webster. Is he a bloodhound that can use smell to guide him? Devon wasn't going to forgive such impudence. Who dared to kill his comrades? Even if they themselves were careless, it couldn't be left like that. Anyone who dares to disrupt Jormungand's plan will die. Stefan saw and heard nothing. He was surrounded by tiny particles of power, weaving an insulating golden blanket. Each person's strength is individual, closely related to their habits and cultivation methods. This gives each person a special smell, so Webster's aura exuded a foul smell of sweat because he put a lot of effort into physical development. And this kid can also be identified by smell. There it is! A pillar of power struck where Stefan had stood a second ago. The blow grazed him, leaving bloody streaks on his forehead. How could they even find him in this yellow haze? There was no time to feel sorry for himself. Another blow came from the side, throwing the young man aside and dragging him along the ground. What did he say about energy? Most of the trees planted around Kayuan were good conductors of power, and now it was the flowering season. It seemed that Stefan had a plan in his head. He called to himself all the pollen that was in the air, all the small flowers swirling in the currents of air. It all depends on how you sniff. Devon should lose his bearings. And he was indeed losing it inexorably. Surrounded by flowers whose energy dissipated all other flows, he lost his main advantage. Now Stefan himself will find him. A stream of blue energy finally caused the orange streams of Devon's power to dissipate. Flames flared up around the figure of the young man. Devon couldn't believe what was happening. How could any student defeat him? But the streams of power inexorably overtook him, piercing his body and soul, scattering his personality. It was as if he had been crucified. Devon's death was swift and full of bewilderment. The director was away, so Stefan decided to examine the body himself. In one of the pockets, he found a sphere with the symbol of Jormungand. It was worth twirling it in my hands a little, and it activated, dispersing energy around. It turned out to be a data carrier. The moving yellow dot indicated the target, the energy collection tower. Meanwhile, Larry walked around the stadium as if it were his own backyard. Suddenly, he spotted another patrolman. Where did all these patrolmen come from? The teacher looked quite harmless. Besides, she immediately decided that Larry was a student who for some reason had not gotten into the shelter. He quickly got his bearings and pretended to feel ill. A kind woman rushed to the young man to help, and he took out from his bosom the same pistol that Stefan had recently acquired. The barrel was pressed right against the teacher's chest, clearly hinting that her life would end right now. Shot! And the good-natured teacher fell over backwards from the force of the push, breathing her last. How unpleasant it was! The teachers were so pathetic. Larry dipped his fingers into the wound and ran them across his face, smearing the blood. Let everyone see that he didn't come here to play games. The director, who was nearby, at that moment discovered that 3 people were no longer responding. He did not know that all 3 were already dead. Larry soon saw him and tried his trick again. Mr. Johnson was not a hard-hearted man either, and he hurried to the injured student. Larry, of course, reached for his gun again. However, the director did not hold his position in vain and quickly noticed the suspicious movement. He immediately realized that it was a member of Jormungand and called upon his powers to protect himself from the shot. The bullet flew right next to his shoulder. The man's face did not change for a second. He had managed to prepare for this. Mr. Johnson managed not only to dodge, but also to make a countermaneuver, going behind Larry. Impact! A dark cloud of dust rose up, and stones began to rain down. Well, finally, at least one strong opponent. He was even glad about it. Putting the pipe to his lips, Larry inhaled the purple smoke. And then he exhaled, and purple clouds enveloped him. No matter, they would see each other later. However, he was not allowed to leave so easily. An aura of threat thickened around him, which could be cut with a knife like a pie. It was Carrie who rushed to the director's aid and applied the block just in time. Chains fell from the sky, trapping Larry in tight coils. The girl controlled them like a puppeteer with strings. The member of Jormungand was tied up, entangled in chains of power, and could not even escape, or even marvel. But Carrie didn't stop there. She tugged at the chains, pulling the man towards her. The purpose of this was clear and understandable. She immediately stepped on his face, mercilessly pressing her heel right into his teeth. With the last of his strength, he pulled a pistol from his bosom, hoping to at least deal with the girl with it. But she only pressed harder on his head, causing him to lose all ability to resist. She will avenge her colleagues no matter what it costs her. Carrie really wanted to destroy him, tear him to pieces and grind him into dust, but the director reminded him, this was the only member of Jormungand that they managed to capture alive. He cannot be killed. Mr. Dodgson took the gun from Larry and examined it carefully. It was an amazing weapon. Even his powers could not do anything. How many more weapons like this did the Order have? The director immediately called everyone who was online, warning them. Members of Jormungand were pretending to be students. They needed to be on guard and not let anyone near the tower. Stefan, meanwhile, walked after the yellow dot, which led him to the Order's goal. He didn't know what exactly he was heading for, and even indulged in frivolous dreams that he would eventually stumble upon treasure. However, instead of treasures, at the end of the path he was met with gray boxes of explosives. He clearly remembered how, during class, Teacher Hilton called him to the board, telling him about the peculiarities of how explosive devices work. Then he drew the student's attention. The red wire must be cut, and under no circumstances the green one. However, Stefan then began to act before he thought, and confidently cut the green. An irreparable mistake. He then had to run away from the angry teacher. Camp, of course, was watching from the sidelines, waiting for the explosion. It should have happened a couple of minutes ago. What went wrong? Why didn't it work? Stefan had learned his lesson well and quickly cut all the red wires he could reach. He activated the sphere again to check how the data it showed would change. Apparently, someone was approaching. The young man hid in the bushes and began to read mantras, hoping that he would not be discovered. Captain Camp approached almost immediately after Stefan took cover in the foliage and began to quickly examine the area. He didn't miss the clumsy attempt to hide. Sneakers were sticking out of the bushes. He concentrated his power around his open palm, preparing to deliver his signature blow. Stefan felt a wave of powerful energy rushing towards him. There was an explosion. Stones from the destroyed stadium flew in all directions. The bushes were now nothing but empty space. If Stefan had slowed down even for a second, he would have suffered the same fate. Then Camp saw a red sphere in the boy's hand. These tokens are unique. They can only be obtained if a fighter dies. Not only did this kid kill one of the members of the Order, but he also seemed to be mocking us. He needs to be made to regret that he was ever born. Stefan realized that the force of the blow was not the same as before, but even more powerful. Could this really be the owner of the golden pill? Camp also assessed the opponent's potential. Could this disciple really be in the chi refining stage? Well, that was just an introduction. They will only start communicating now. A heavy foot strike landed on Stefan's chest. He was thrown back. The young man flew into a tree with his back. This knocked the wind out of him completely. Blood began to flow from Stefan's mouth and nose. This time, the damage was significant. It hurt, as if every bone in his body had been broken. Camp loomed overhead and delivered another blow, forcing this student to remember his place. Now it was possible to take the token from him without any problems. Easy win. Now how do we get in touch with Larry? How is he doing with their plan? However, turning his back on the still-living Stefan was a mistake. The young man picked up a stone from the ground and poured into it all the spiritual strength he could find. What a jerk! This child of yesterday doesn't think he can deal with camp with a stone, does he? However, this was more than just a stone. It was a stone charged with energy and thrown by the hand of a man with an endless supply of chi. But Camp still caught it easily, as if he had deliberately let it fly right up to his face. However, this was just a way to buy time. Stefan had already jumped up and, using feints, made his way behind the commander's back. Although he may not be comparable to him in terms of chi strength, physically the young man is no worse. Throw! Camp's heavy body punched a hole in the ground, causing the energy to fly out in rings. The broad-shouldered silhouette appeared again in the cloud of dust. Of course, the captain had survived this attack. The battle continued. It's been a long time since camp has seen such capable students. Meanwhile, the principal was interrogating Larry. He and Carrie were joined by some other teachers, so many witnessed what was happening. Larry smiled pitifully. Even though he had been caught, the task was almost completed. A little more and there would be explosions. They could not allow him to be mocked and insolent. After all, which of them was the prisoner? The director leaned over Larry menacingly, demanding to know where the explosives were and when the detonation was supposed to occur. But the question quickly became moot. An orange glow lit up the sky. It may not have been an explosion, but it was clearly the power of the golden pill, no better. In the Kayuan safe zone, some were sleeping, some were enjoying themselves as best they could, and some were receiving medical care. Leona did not participate in the excited discussions. All her thoughts revolved around Stefan. She dialed his number, biting her fingernail in excitement. However, the subscriber not only did not answer, he was out of network coverage. She couldn't stand the tension and jumped up. No. What if he was in danger? The girl couldn't leave him alone. So the blow sent Stefan crashing into the wall again. Perhaps he could recognize the different surfaces he had encountered today with his back. Hell, he's not even an opponent for camp. But why does he feel a constant flow of blood into his body? The captain didn't feel triumphant either. Any other cultivator would have been dead by now, but this one only seemed a little battered. Suddenly, the young man decided to use some completely childish trick and shouted that there was someone behind camp. But the explosion should have attracted the attention of the director and the others, shouldn't it? Of course, yes. The childish trick turned out to be true. Behind the commander's back, a light flashed, characteristic of the owner of the golden pill. A whole team of teachers showed up at the stadium. One of them held Larry on a chain like a dog. The director shouted that all members of the order, except Camp himself, were destroyed, and his comrade had betrayed him. Larry couldn't even refute this statement. His mouth was sealed with a spell. Full of anger, Camp summoned all his forces. A bunch of rabble. Well, he'll deal with them all at once. However, suddenly a sharp pain pierced his body, and a fountain of blood burst from his mouth. Could this be residual energy from the boy's blow? Taking advantage of the moment of confusion, Carrie decided to attack. While she was delivering a distracting blow, Teacher Hilton delivered a real blow from behind. A new, this time wider, back crashed into the long-suffering wall. Camp endured this too. He croaked that they shouldn't look down on Jormungand. They had a backup plan. He raised his hand and pressed the trigger button. However, absolutely nothing happened. What is it? Why didn't it work? Stefan smiled like a model student and reported that he seemed to have defused all the bombs planted around the perimeter. They had no more trump cards. The director suggested surrendering. Then, perhaps, law enforcement agencies would spare the captain's life. He didn't want to give up, but 5 energetic teachers surrounded Camp from all sides, leaving him no choice. The tension of the moment was interrupted by Leona's scream. She burst into the stadium and stormed towards Stefan, screaming that she was worried about him. Suddenly, Camp burst out laughing. They have one of the most powerful bombs among them, and they don't even know about it. The captain raised his hand, enveloped in a red ball of energy. Remove the seal, and Larry's body suddenly glowed the same scarlet. The energy inside him raged, boiled, rose like a wave, and finally demolished the dam of fragile human flesh. Stefan shouted at Leona to go to the principal, and he rushed straight to Larry. He grabbed the hot body of the order member who had lost control and threw himself onto the ground with him, hoping to use his body to protect the others from the explosion. Or, no, he's not going to accompany them to hell. Now he's going to give Camp this present back. The teachers summoned all their strength to protect themselves and Leona from the coming explosion. The director folded his hands into a protective seal, surrounding himself and the others with threads of chi energy. Protective seals rose above the teachers, keeping the blast wave within a narrow confinement. Leona screamed desperately. Stefan was still there inside. The atmosphere in the law enforcement office was nowhere near as tense. According to the report, a magnitude 6 explosion was recorded at a school in Kaiyuan. It covered a diameter of only 100 meters. Such a strong explosion should have been much more destructive. So, someone influenced it. It was probably produced by members of Jormungand. They needed to head to school immediately. And there the entire stadium was covered in a black and red cloud of stinking smoke. The charred bodies of Larry and Camp lay one on top of the other, their destructive lives finally ending. Even a person in the golden pill period couldn't survive this explosion. So Stefan couldn't survive it. Leona fell to the ground, not caring about her bruised knees. Had he really died so easily and quickly? But it seemed to be him. A youthful figure appeared behind a curtain of smoke. The student was shouting that he was okay. He was covered in dust and blood, but he was smiling broadly. He's fine. Well, almost. He definitely will be when he comes to his senses. Stefan fainted, almost hitting his head again. Everyone immediately rushed to him. What a miracle he survived that explosion. The director touched his chest, assessing the condition of the young man. He was indeed alive, although he had lost a lot of energy. Here the graceful feet of law enforcement officers touched the ground. The teachers were quite surprised by this appearance. The law enforcement officers came in person to deal with their case, although the director thought that they could have appeared earlier. But there was no need to worry. Otto showed up in person, which meant the situation was in good hands. Finally, both he and his female employees noticed the corpses in a hole in the ground. These were the owners of the golden pill. When it turned out that they were exposed by a simple student, they were all speechless. Together they leaned over Stefan. Could this really be the one? Otto placed his fingers on it, sending streams of healing energy into the body. Stefan finally came to his senses and opened his eyes. When he woke up, he saw a golden flower above the head of a stranger. However, when asked what he saw, the student replied that he saw a lot of wrinkles on the old man's face. Leona then spoke up. Could it really be that this was a flower that signified the peak of the Yuanyan period, one of the highest levels of cultivation? Otto stroked his beard smugly. Yes, that's exactly it. But now it's time to answer his questions seriously. Stefan nodded obediently. Yes, it was he who arranged all this. Otto narrowed his eyes in disbelief and sent the employees to get special equipment. It was necessary to check the bodies of the order members. He brought the tablet and pointed it at the bodies of the dead. It was an exclusive piece of equipment that allowed one to read the residual energy and fragments of memories of the deceased. All the events of the last hours, all the battles and plans flashed before Otto's eyes. He saw both camps' defeat and how Larry turned into a living bomb. It's amazing. Who would have thought that some young guy could handle all this? Be that as it may, a decision was made to take the bodies and hand them over to other departments. Stefan and Leona went to rest together. It had been a hard day for both of them. The young man grumbled discontentedly that the girl was showing too much control. But she was just caring. Otto smiled slyly as he looked at this sweet couple. But for some reason the smile very quickly turned into a cold grin. The students were released from their hiding places, and a new meeting was already being held the next day. The students animatedly discussed the news, confusing truth and gossip. But everyone knew one truth. Some student who dealt with the members of the order was very cool. The director began his speech again with the need to train hard and build up one's strength. However, one thing was news. Stefan had made a huge contribution to the victory over the members of Jormungand, and for this, he had earned a letter of recommendation to the university. The other students couldn't believe it and could barely hold back tears of envy and admiration. Besides, after finishing his studies, he will be able to work in the authorities without any obstacles. A dream. Leona leaned towards Stefan, congratulating him on such good news. She whispered that a great future awaited him. The young man himself did not expect that this would cause him embarrassment. The teacher also hastened to congratulate him. Of course, it was number one who deserved such honors, but he still shouldn't get too cocky. Stefan said goodbye to everyone with a smile and hurried to rest. The darkness of night fell upon his house. There was a photograph of the teacher and Leona on the table. It was tidy and laconic. Stefan himself relaxed in the hot water in the bathroom. Suddenly, the rest was interrupted by a knock on the door. Who could it be? The door swung open, revealing one of the university's most powerful teachers. It was Carrie, and she clearly wasn't about to talk on the doorstep. It was the director who sent her to talk to Stefan. Director? This must be some kind of additional task. He tried to convince Carrie that his body had not yet recovered, and he was not ready to resume training. But such excuses did not inspire her. Of course, Stefan had to let the teacher into the house. So she handed him a letter of recommendation from law enforcement. However, they had a small request. During the summer holidays, Stefan was supposed to go to the underground city for an internship. It was a dangerous place, a gathering place for scum. They were unprincipled and killed anyone who could not defend themselves. Even family or friendly ties did not have much significance there. If Stefan goes there, he will certainly die. The young man put the letter down with regret. No, he was not ready to do this. However, Carrie had more aces up her sleeve. Artifacts were placed on the table. A soul pill that would allow one to survive even if one's soul was torn to shreds, and chainmail that would protect against any weapon. These were unique and very expensive items, and Stefan began to hesitate. However, life was still more expensive. Then Carrie took out a small black card. It was a map that allowed one to move freely throughout the entire underground city. But if it really is that powerful, then maybe it's a fake. Carrie was pushing hard enough that Stefan was starting to think it wasn't all that bad. Waves of snow rose up around the girl. It was an amazing energy management ability. If he can handle the underground city and get into university, he can do the same. If he can figure out his powers, he will be almost invincible. With a little effort of will, he can turn snow into flame. Maybe his environment is simply too comfortable for further development? Maybe he should leave his comfort zone to reach his potential? It was impressive and scary. Stefan pretended to think about it, although it was as if the decision had already been made for him. Carrie winked at the young man. Let him decide quickly. So he quickly grabbed the papers. He needed them. Stefan decided he would not get into trouble. He would sit quietly in the corner and thus quickly and safely complete the internship. And then a place at the university and at work will definitely be his. He happily hugged the artifacts to himself, and Carrie, pleased with herself, left. She promised that tomorrow morning someone would take him to the underground city. That someone turned out to be Leona. Stefan, quite pleased with the morning, happily ran out onto the porch. Leona's appearance did not exactly upset him, but it puzzled him. He was expecting a different guide. What is he unhappy about? The director sent her. The girl said that this year the university introduced a new way of taking entrance exams, and a trip to the underground city would be the best preparation. And she is not at all afraid of traveling there. Together they covered quite a long distance and found themselves in a very unpleasant area. Leona pressed herself against Stefan, embarrassing him again. Finally, a giant gate appeared before them. The gate to the underground city. The guards smoked lazily, confident that they could defeat anyone who tried to get inside. Suddenly they saw people approaching the entrance. It was some young man and a girl with him. Well, it's time to stretch your legs. Meanwhile, Stefan and Leona came very close to the gate. All the better. 4 guards fell upon them from above. But they didn't attack right away, but instead effectively assumed a previously rehearsed pose. The students were not so much frightened as puzzled. Stefan reached for the black card in his pocket. Having taken it out, he effectively threw it to one of the guards. He seemed a little puzzled. What was going on? And then the card caught up with him like a powerful weapon. Leona mockingly stated that Stefan, with his physical attributes, really should use a secret weapon. The guard's forehead was split by this card. Stefan broke out in a cold sweat. What if he had been deceived, and this was not a pass? But the guard took it and began to examine it. Suddenly he realized something and jumped up, rushing quickly towards the young man. Then he bowed respectfully, holding out his pass to the young man with both hands. He also apologized for not opening the gates right away. Then Stefan realized this was indeed a very valuable thing. The gates swung open and they walked inside unhindered. It turned out that the director regularly sent students with such cards to study in the underground city. Mr. Johnson was usually right. Everyone who came there had great potential. Together, Stefan and Leona looked over the map, determining where the guild was located. It turned out that she had taken a place in the very center of the city. Wherever they went, they would still stumble upon her. It was noisy and crowded inside the majestic building. At the entrance, they again showed the black card to receive assistance and support. The beautiful employee smiled welcomingly, inviting them inside. The other visitors to the guild couldn't believe that such a young man had such a card. Stefan, however, received a message from the director. He was told to adapt to the local environment and follow the instructions that would be given on the spot. The young man was immediately handed a personal black card, which meant that he was registered as a participant in the Colosseum. But what kind of Colosseum is this? The employee pressed herself indecently close to Stefan, coquettishly asserting that he was not familiar with the local rules. It turns out that all new guild members must go through battles in the Colosseum to become stronger. Together, they entered the elevator and went to the minus 10th floor. The deeper they go, the more dangerous it is. You have to be on your guard. And now it's minus 10th floor. The girls were so happy with the open doors, as if there was not a coliseum behind them, but a resort. And behind the doors, it was as if the stench from a huge bear's mouth immediately hit my face. The man fought with him, not paying attention to the blood flowing from his nose. He was able to flip the huge animal onto its back. The crowd roared with joy, and some people placed bets. The presenter tore his microphone apart with shouts, commenting on what was happening. As Stefan entered the arena, a light fell on him, attracting everyone's attention. So right away? To fight? What a dubious privilege. Leona covered her face with her hands in horror. She too did not expect that danger would overtake her so soon. So Stefan came out into the very center, illuminated by a golden beam. The crowd couldn't believe that this kid, who was at the chi refining stage, was able to obtain a black card. The young man convinced himself that he had already killed several monsters and would be able to deal with a couple more. The grate slid to the side, revealing a drooling mouth. The assistant girls were speechless. There should be much weaker monsters on the first level. Stefan was also taken aback. He had never expected such a serious opponent. It was a huge wolf blazing with red flames. In one of the boxes, a man in a cloak lazily swung a glass of wine. It was thanks to his instructions that the monster was replaced with a stronger one. Stefan quickly analyzed the situation. The monster belongs to the wolf class, which means that it will quickly attack and tear apart. The presenter shouted into the microphone, "Here is the monster jumping up, beginning the attack." The young man gathered his strength, ashamed to lose in his first competition. Streams of power spread out in waves to the sides, illuminating the Colosseum with blue light. The wolf didn't even have time to jump up to the man. He was thrown to the side. The crowd howled in indignation and shock. Some simply did not expect such a turn of events. Some lost their bets. The first row was damaged. The host hastened to calm everyone who was sitting there. People dispersed to the sides, discontented. They knew that it was not worth sitting in the front row. The consultants were quick to praise Stefan, much to Leona's embarrassment. She was embarrassed to admit that the young man was her boyfriend. After all, they were really just classmates. However, suddenly the steel wolf stood up. The monster began to circle around Stefan, distracting him. This was his signature technique, wolf shadow. It was unclear which of the four wolves was real. Then, "We'll have to attack them all." The monster rushed towards the young man, not paying attention to the blue light surrounding him. But then he froze. Both the presenter and the support group could not believe their eyes. Stefan boldly approached the frozen beast and boldly took it by the mouth, freezing for a few seconds to give everyone the opportunity to admire it. And then he went and smashed his head through the floor. Looking at the slain monster, the young man thought, "Will they make him pay for the broken floor?" The doctors made some efforts, but could not do anything with the monster. It did not move. Stefan was declared the winner. Leona was happy for his victory and for the fact that he survived the battle. According to the rules, the winner was entitled to a prize. This time it was a crystal that could only be obtained after killing an A level. In addition to this, the young man also received guild points, the local currency. Such crystals were incredibly valuable and could be used to make various artifacts. With a couple of these crystals, Stefan could become the richest man in the city. Leona whispered congratulations in his ear. However, he did not react properly. The young man still dreamed of wealth. The man on the balcony angrily smashed a glass. Who would have thought he could handle it? But no matter, they had aces up their sleeve. A face covered with a bandage appeared in the sliding doors. A silent girl, dressed like a real warrior, entered the arena. There was an anger written on her face that Stefan couldn't understand. The Colosseum employees blocked the young man's path, preventing him from leaving. This girl has challenged him, he can't refuse. If they had been dressed less revealingly, Stefan might have objected more intelligently. "Okay, since the crowd is waiting, we need to put on a show for them." Now the light fell on two human figures standing in the middle of the arena. The girl looked at Stefan point blank, as if continuing to challenge him. He noticed a tattoo on her stomach. Was it really Jormungand again? But the host didn't give time for reflection. It was time to start the fight. And then thin, sharp blades emerged from the girl's sleeves. She rushed towards the young man like a swift arrow, and he stepped back for a second, stunned by the onslaught. The hooded man clutched the Jormungand token, confident that everything would go well. So, the girl confidently advanced. But where did she get the weapon? It is forbidden to bring it into the Colosseum. The girl, however, clearly didn't care who was prohibited there. What's more, daggers also appeared on the toes of the boots. They shone under the spotlight so that her feet seemed to outline crescent moons. However, as soon as the blade passed over Stefan's chest, it shattered into pieces. Under the torn t-shirt, the armor that Carrie had brought only yesterday was revealed. Stefan was worried about his torn t-shirt. Where could he get a new one? The girl froze in shock. Where did he get such artifacts? However, she was not going to give up. Stefan confidently grabbed her by the headphones. Why is it that the people of Jormungand are always nothing special? Strike! The opponent's head was thrown back. She herself flew back, drenching herself and the floor with blood. And of course, she also did not fail to collide with the long-suffering wall of the Colosseum. She was dead, her eyes empty. To make sure of this, the presenter even shone a flashlight into her eyes. And Stefan won again. This time, Leona did not feel any embarrassment and praised the young man for everyone to hear. And his score suddenly increased several times. He took all of them from his defeated opponent. The leading conspirator whispered that he had managed to make a lot of money in one day. The one person who was not happy about this victory was the man on the balcony. The token in his hand activated, revealing a message. Another man, hiding his face, reminded, Stefan is a fickle figure. He requires constant supervision. While the crowd was cheering, the people on the balcony left, unnoticed. Stefan and Leona also went on a well-deserved rest. As he went up to his rooms, the young man said that his rival was from Jormungand, and they needed to be on their guard. Or better yet, leave this place altogether. They hurried to their rooms while at least the corridors were safe. Stefan promised to be there and help if anything happened. The girl looked at him from behind the door, embarrassed, deciding to say something. Finally, she squeezed out that he was very handsome today and quickly disappeared into the room. Stefan, having recovered from his embarrassment, clicked the lock. It's time to report what happened. He decided to call the director as the main person involved. He had something to tell. No joke. Jormungand was on the horizon again. The director immediately picked up the phone, realizing that they wouldn't call him just like that. Stefan described the events of the past day in all the colors, hiding nothing. The director realized that the situation required his intervention. What to do? Mr. Johnson looked thoughtfully at the computer screen. Meanwhile, the usual boring squabbles were taking place in the law enforcement office. One of the employees answered the director's call. She was more busy with her nails than with the dialogue. So she underestimated how unexpected the news would be for the director that there was no case about Jormungand and no bodies had been delivered. The sharp scream caused the brush to slip, staining the fingers. She pursed her lips angrily. Why not yell at those who were to blame for what happened? What does she have to do with it? The girl angrily repeated that she knew nothing and hung up. The director was left alone with the loud beeping. He thought. After all, he himself saw how the law enforcement officers took away the bodies. He was definitely watching what was happening then and was definitely in his right mind. What happened? Meanwhile, in the underground city, the hooded man was going deeper into the slums. Their darkness and red, scary eyes awaited him. The eyes belonged to something big and dangerous. The man in the hood had a gold-rimmed monocle and also a uniform brooch like those worn by law enforcement officers. He was pleased to show off the large steel coffins that were waiting in the wings. The lids swung open, revealing two bodies hidden inside. One of them belonged to Commander Camp. The one who waited in the darkness touched his body with a clawed hand, assessing the rare experimental material. All the man with the monocle wanted was to help kill one person. This person should not be underestimated, even though he is only at the stage of chi purification. His interlocutor grinned widely, showing inhuman teeth. Perhaps it will become an even better experimental material. After all, Mr. Otto will not offer anything bad.